And so I always tell the story when I give a presentation that I used to give when I first started off my career for the first 5 years before kids. I gave great advice to parents like, why be worried about an IEP meeting? That's not stressful, and oh, it's just a collaborative process. And then after I had my first, who was had learning needs, and we at 2.5 were sitting at a IEP team table, I realized how stressful this whole process is for parents. And as I tell everyone, I would much rather be the attorney at the table than the parent at the table. So my goal, in all candor, is for this information session to give you working knowledge of what your rights are, what you can and cannot ask for, and some tips to how to do that. We're going to talk about both IEPs and 504s because obviously, as I'll explain, kids can fall into both nets or one net. But in any event, I think we can go ahead and get started with the first slide. Okay, so we start off with the IEP, and one of the questions, and I actually give talks on, is what is the difference between an IEP and 504? So to give a frame of reference, I always like to give a visual. So if you think of like a big circle, that's all kids with disabilities, okay? It's a big circle. Within that there's a smaller circle. That is for kids with disabilities who qualify for an IEP. The bigger circle is 504, the smaller circle is IEPs, meaning that all kids with disabilities who impact, and we'll talk about kind of the qualifications, are going to fall into 504, but a subset falls into an IEP. And really the point of an IEP is to provide, as you can see, an individualized special education plan. And why that's so important, I always like to highlight the word individualized, is, I have parents who say, well, can I ask for that? And I always say, well, you can if your child needs it, because there is no limitation really on what you can creatively solution make or have programs for kids, but it just has to be based upon the child's individual need. Meaning that just because maybe a friend's kid gets a certain service, that doesn't automatically entitle you to it. It's based upon what your child's individual needs are. It also involves related services. Related services are like speech, OT, but there's some related services that we often don't think about, psychological service and recreational services. And why recreation services I think is really important for JA kids is because the fact is it allows special accommodations and programming to be put into place so they can access sporting events, after school clubs, anything that they may need to make those activities more accessible, including even if there was a PTA sponsored school event. Again, having those unique needs of related services to make it accessible for all kids. These services are provided at no cost. You'll hear a lot of acronyms when we speak, and FAPE is one of them. And what that means is a free, appropriate public school education. And again, these are all costs. There should be no cost to parents. I have had a handful of times that districts have asked parents to pay for certain things. For example, if you might not think of it, but for example, a child who could not ride a regular education bus and might need specialized transportation, sometimes districts have asked the parents, well, can you just transport? And that's actually not legally appropriate. It's supposed to be free. Obviously, the parents are incurring costs and they would have to provide, if the parents agree to it, some level of reimbursement. The law that you qualify for under an IEP is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this is a federal law, meaning that does apply to all states and U.S. territories. Surprisingly, even Guam falls under this umbrella of special education law. So when I'm speaking, just understand that there is federal law that applies to all 50 states. However, there is also special state laws that can enhance rights that kids may have in different states. And then also how federal law is interpreted can be different within your state or jurisdiction. I have tried cases in 6 different states, and although I always operate under the same law, the same fact scenario doesn't necessarily always have the same outcome in the different states. Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. Now, here's who is eligible for an IEP. First, child has to have one or more specific disability categories. There's literally just, occupational orthopedic impairment, specific learning disability, emotional disturbance. They have to fall into one category. Now, there is a category called other health impairment, and that is for kids who may not fit into a specific category, but have a disability that can impact their ability to access education. The key though is, so if you have a child with JA, they can fall into that other health category, but the disability must impact a child's performance and demonstrate what's a need for specially designed instruction. So what is specially designed instruction? Because that's a key word that you oftentimes hear, which is, SDI, your child doesn't need SDI. What that means is at some level, the way the information is being communicated or instructed to your child, they need something specially designed to be able to access it. So for example, if you have a child with JA who, for whatever reason, cannot do any type of handwriting, they may need specially designed instruction to teach them alternate formats to be able to communicate their information. Because again, a child may not know how to, provide voice recordings or provide different technology devices. So that would require specifically designed instruction. All right, the next slide. 504 plan. Okay, so now we're in the big circle. We went from the little circle to the big circle. So let's say you have a child with JA who really doesn't need specially designed instruction. They really just need, services and accommodations. Again, like IEPs, 504s are provided at no cost. It is a different law, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. However, some fun little facts about 504. First is you still have a right to a free, appropriate public education. So the child needs to be making meaningful educational progress. But it specifically has said it, and it's said it since 1973. It does allow for kids to receive special education services. So for example, let's say you have a child with JA who needs a slower pace to being able to communicate their thoughts in writing due to any type of physical limitations, or might need a situation, for example, a kid has a flare-up and that child may need in-home instruction for a period of time. That child can access any special education services, meaning if a learning support teacher needs to go out, if they need to have in-home instruction for that child, basically anything that that child would need can happen under 504 as well as the IDEA. So they can't say to you, and you will hear this more often than I care to admit, which is, well, you don't qualify for that. That's special education. You only have a 504 plan. Again, the regs specifically talk about the fact that you have a right to any special education services. And this is, again, like the IDEA, a federal civil rights law. And I always like to highlight that because if someone said to you, well, don't worry about it, we're just going to discriminate against you because you're a man, or discriminate against you because you're a woman, you'd be like, whoa, that's not right. These laws that are designed to protect kids and adults with disabilities, and 504 applies to adults as well, provide the fact that you cannot discriminate. They have to create an access and an equal playing field, at the same as you could not be discriminated against because of race, religion, creed, or color. So again, these are important laws, and they're ones that parents should absolutely be pursuing to make sure their kids are getting what they need. And I think we're ready for the next slide. All right, so who is eligible for a 504? To get a 504, there's basically two requirements. One, you have to have a disability, and it can be, there's not a specific category, so anything would qualify as a quote unquote disability. And it must impact a substantial basic life, substantially limit one or more basic life activities. However, one of the things that is included is learning and attention issues. So if a kid with JA is having an impact on their ability to learn or to attend, that can absolutely qualify for a 504. 504s tend to be needed to have some sort of documentation of a medical basis for it. And so one of the things to be mindful of is, for example, they can't legally require you to go to a doctor to get a medical diagnosis. Meaning, if you present to them saying, listen, my kid has juvenile arthritis, and they say, well, we're going to need documentation. You can provide that if you want, but if it's a situation where you don't legally have to. They actually have to provide any type of medical testing necessary to evaluate the child if you're letting them know that you have a child with a disability. And I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay. Who creates the 504 plan? Well, the thing about there are positives and negatives about 504 plans, and they're the exact same thing. It's positive because the IDA is a very rule centered, specific requirements at every level. And the 504 is much less specific, but that works both positively and negatively. Positively, it means that there's nothing that prevents anything. I mean, it's not specified. So there's no plan in place that says it has to be one way or the other way. However, it can also be a situation where that works against you because the fact is you don't have those specific, no, these people absolutely have to be here for this process to go forward. And one of the things that's really important to know about 504 plans is it absolutely must begin with an evaluation. Oftentimes, I will see kids with 504 plans not have that evaluation. It'll just be like, well, we brought a note in from the doctor saying they needed a 504 plan, and the doctor said the child might need extended time or excusal from gym or something along those lines. Here's why that's bad. Doctors, although great people, very knowledgeable, don't necessarily understand everything that happens within a school-based setting. And the whole point of having an evaluation where they take information from a doctor and also test a child independently is to be able to see how it's going to impact a kid day to day in school. So let me give you some examples of why that would be critical. Let's say you have a child, again, with arthritis in their hands and fingers, and the doctor says, give extended time for writing. Well, that may be a great idea, except if it's a situation where that child's now being placed into a class that they're having to take extensive notes in. They can't use extended time for that note taking. But again, the doctor may not be aware that, Mrs. Sullivan's class, all she does is, talk from the smartboard, and the children are supposed to be expected to take notes. So having that evaluation where people from the school can say, okay, so we know it's going to impact the ability to have extended writing. For Mrs. Sullivan's class, we're going to have to provide notes and outlines. It's not just extended time. So it really is critical that you get an evaluation done. If you don't have an evaluation of your child, you should absolutely get one right now. And one of the things that we had talked about at a podcast last year, which is the importance of getting that 504 evaluation, is because the fact is that there may be more supports and services that are needed during COVID time, because you have kids who are, under the age of 12 who cannot access the vaccination, or kids who are immune compromised who cannot get the vaccination, or kids who are immune compromised who, my understanding is that the vaccines may possibly be less effective for. So there may be times that kids during this next year, because of the Delta variant, and please, Lord, I hope it doesn't come to fruition that we have to go into any type of closures or schools closed for any period of time. But if that's the case, or even if it's not the case, the school is closed, if the situation that you as a parent of a kid who may be immune compromised are concerned about sending your child to school, you need to have that evaluation and plan in place for if either the transmission rates get too high or school closures, that those kids are still being able to access education. Because what my concern is a lot of districts are getting away from the virtual or cyber options. And so what's going to happen is the old school way of, if your kid missed school for a period of time, basically they would just send the work home from. Well, if we are in a period of a cyclical situation where schools are closing or kids are quarantining, or there's situations where your kid can't go because transmission rates are too high, your child's going to be missing way too much education for them to basically educate themselves on the worksheet. So having plans in place, such as, having the kids, teacher come to the house, being able to virtually Zoom into a classroom, other options in place for them during this time period. When you take that evaluation data and services, you need to have a 504 meeting. It should absolutely include a child's parent. You definitely want to bring input from your doctor or anybody who is working with your child. It should include both general and special education teachers. It could also include a school principal, a counselor, or the school nurse. But you definitely want to make sure that you're active in asking for certain people to be there if you feel that they're important. So, for example, if you have a class or teacher who really gets your child and knows how to work with your child, absolutely ask for that teacher to be present. One of the things you also want to ask for in a 504 plan is how the plan is going to be communicated and taught to the people working with your child. And why that is important is if I could, I would be rich if I could unfortunately tell you how many times I have myself experienced, or I have had situations where my clients have experienced, teachers don't necessarily know a kid has a 504 plan. It's kept on a file. Maybe they got an email, they missed it. And it isn't until things are going really bad that the parent realizes that the teacher was never aware that there was a 504 plan. So again, you always want to ask the question is, how is this plan, once we've created it, going to be communicated to everyone who's working with your child? And it is important to make sure everyone who's working with your child is aware of it. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide. And again, keeping in that same vein, there's no standard 504 plan. Generally, though, I will say that most school districts have a written document. It doesn't actually have to be a written document, although from the lawyer in me, although represents parents, I would be telling school districts have a written plan, because obviously if it's not in writing, there's confusion, misunderstanding, and most states require a written plan to be created. However, it should be, you should have a written plan. If for some reason you are in a unique school district or a unique state that does not require a written plan, you definitely want to be utilizing what I call the oatmeal cookie email that I tell parents to send to schools when you're trying to document information without coming across as very negative. So for example, you don't want to send an email after a 504 meeting saying, I want to document that we are very clear of what the 504 plan is going to state. You do an Oreo oatmeal pie cookie situation where you start off with, thank you so much for meeting with me today. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for taking out your time. Then you put the documentation in place. I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page, that these are the things we discussed, and these are the specific accommodations, supports, and services, and you list them directly. And then again, thank you for my time. I'm so glad you'll be Noah's teacher, or so glad this team is working on Noah's behalf for the upcoming year. And again, so that way it's not hitting their radar screen at some reason that you're trying to document stuff, but you definitely need to document it. It is very critical that you read, if there is a written 504 plan, you need to read it. And I say this saying that, I know there's a conceptual idea that we read it, but sometimes you go to the meeting, you get a 504 plan, and you discuss a lot of changes. And then they said, no problem, we'll send one home to you. You assume that those changes and supports and services that you discussed at the meeting are going to be in there. I cannot tell you how oftentimes I have parents say, well, we discussed it. I thought it was in there. And sometimes it has been major things such as a one-on-one aid, working with the child, especially one to be a scribe. Like that was something they discussed at the meeting. They said they could do it. It never hit the 504 plan. It never happened. It is important to document who is going to be providing each services. Now, when I say the term name, it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific person, but it has to be the guidance counselor will provide this service. The learning support teacher will provide this service, the nurse. You definitely want to have the who is going to be providing each service. And then again, as we talked about before, the name of the person responsible for ensuring the plan is implemented. How is this going to be communicated? Who's responsible for that? And make sure that that's part of it, that there is a situation that Mrs. Rogers will be meeting with Noah's teachers to go over the plan to ensure the plan is going to be implemented correctly. And that can absolutely and should be part of the 504. Again, as I spoke at before, this is a comprehensive plan to address anything your child's experiencing at the public school system. So for example, if your child participates in sports through the public school system, any accommodation should be in there. One of the things that, especially in light of what I've seen COVID impacting a lot of kids, kids' grades and the way the virtual learning or cyber learning or even in-person learning was running, kids unfortunately were not doing as well academically as they had in previous years. And a lot of kids whose sports is very critical were not being able to access them because they weren't quote unquote eligible based upon state regulations. So you definitely want to have any accommodations you need for them to be able to access recreation services, after school activities. If there's any big events that the school sponsors that your child needs to access, the supports and accommodations your child's going to need for that. If your child gets on-site childcare at the school district, again, any supports and accommodations you need for them while they're on the on-site childcare. So this 504 plan is really comprehensive to be at all places when your child's there during the school day. I think we're ready for the next slide. All right, so COVID, I have to say, I started giving free Zooms just through my business last summer because there was so many different things coming out at parents. And candidly, within the state of Pennsylvania, where I'm located, we had planned to do them like once a month, but the rules of education and what PDE, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, was saying was changing so rapidly that we ended up getting them every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, it would be something brand new that I would have to either say, okay, so last week or the last time we spoke, I said that this was what was going to be required. They've now changed, and now here's what's going to be required. So again, unfortunately, I'd love to tell you that this will be the solid situation for this next year, but these are going to probably change, number one, and number two, that it is a situation that I'm just still cannot believe we are still talking about it. However, the CDC changed its school recommendations, and I will say to you that I have seen firsthand, not only in my own kids, but in all my clients, the impact COVID has had for this past year. There's a tremendous amount of research that's talking about kind of what COVID closures and have done to kids and their access, socially, emotionally, academically. It has been a very impactful in the world of education. So in-person learning is really being strongly recommended by the CDC. And they are kind of even saying it, even if all the guidelines may not be met 100%, that, basically we have to do as much as possible to keep kids, in person. Obviously, there are strong concerns that there are districts, mine included, that last year offered, 3 types of programming. They ended up with a hybrid model. They ended up by the end of the school year being 4 days a week for all kids. And then they also offered a virtual and then a cyber. And the difference between a virtual and cyber was this. Virtual was kids being able to zoom into the classes, see live teachers, be part of the classroom. And cyber was basically, just work at your own pace, watching videos and a cyber option. Right now, the district is saying, they're taking away virtual options. So you either have to go in person or do cyber option. A lot of times with kids who any type of learning needs or any kids with any type of disabilities often really struggle in the cyber because it requires a lot of self-pacing, a lot of self-motivation. And then if you don't learn exactly how that video is teaching you, you don't have that interaction with a teacher being able to have, communication or clarification. It becomes kind of a one-size-fits-all category, which obviously is against what the individualized education is supposed to be. So if you are in a situation where you are presented with a situation that your child can't attend in person, can you ask for virtual learning? And the answer is 100% yes. There was a lot of conversations I had with people surrounding the return to school, and a lot of people with kids without disabilities wanted to be able to access in-person education. And legally, there is no, constitutional or federal right to have in-person education. But kids with disabilities actually have a right to an appropriate learning environment. And I was fighting for and getting kids whose schools were closed have the opportunity to be able to go into the school because the teachers were actually in school, which did not make much sense to me. They had all the teachers in the building teaching virtually, but to be able to go into the school to learn in person. So you can ask for virtual learning. If your school is closed, you can ask for in-person learning. If your school is only offering cyber, you can say that that's not appropriate to a child's needs and we need more an appropriate virtual learning situation. So you can ask for any of that. Social distancing, absolutely, you can ask for social distancing. Now, The one thing is you can't ask for it for everybody, meaning you can't necessarily say everyone in their class is going to be 6 feet apart, or I guess now it's 3 feet is the recommendation, but you can ask that your child have that 3 feet of space. You can ask for PPP or PPE to be provided, those clear plastic shields. You can ask for the rooms to be arranged in a certain way. You can ask for kids to have to wash their hands when they walk in the room, that they use hand sanitizer, that the desks are properly cleaned, before your child would go to that classroom, or sanitize. So yes, you can ask for all those things. And candidly, most of those things have been in existence for a long time because we've had kids with allergies. I mean, we have a peanut allergy, the kids have to wash their hands. They, wipe down the desks in between stuff. So none of that is going to be seen as unusual or should be seen as unreasonable. These next two words becomes a little bit more difficult and controversial, for lack of a better term. Can you ask for your child to wear a mask all day? Yes, absolutely. You can say my child needs to be wearing a mask. Teachers need to monitor the fact that the mask is being worn properly. The child needs to be reminded if the mask is not being, placed properly, below or above the nose, that the child, be checked for it. The question is whether or not you can require other kids in the classroom to be masked. There is no case law on that at this point in time. There is, which will be interesting to see, there has been some case law about masks in terms of parents seeking districts where there is no mask mandate to be in a situation where, or where there is a mask mandate, for that to be alleviated. So far, none of those have been successful. But if your child needs to be in a masked environment, you can ask for one. That may not be at your local public school system. And I had talked about this previously last year. If your child needs a masked environment and your school is not offering one, and that's what your child needs to be able to attend with non-disabled peers, you can actually ask your district to place them into a private school or an alternate school that would provide for a masked environment. And that's something, again, because your child needs to be in person in a mask, that you can ask for. Vaccination status of teachers and students. You can't necessarily ask for their vaccination status, but what you can do is say he needs to be around teachers who have vaccinations, and so then they can pick their vaccinations in terms of what teachers they can put the child with. You can't necessarily ask what other students have vaccinations, but again, you can say, listen, our child needs to be with non-vax or with vaccinated kids, and you can ask for that be part of the selection process for the students and the teachers that they will be with. You may not get proof of it, but you can say, listen, that's what they need to be around when selecting the environments that the child is going to be in. And I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so how do you do this? So first, you need to start now. And I say that because we are now heading into the last week in July. And as much as I would love to tell you that there's all this time before school starts, you are in the descending time frame of teachers returning to school, all the back to school situations that are occurring. And you need to start that now. One of the things that I'll tell you, and I had mentioned prior to start, is I am actually running for school board. And one of the things that has happened that I would never have made the suggestion before, but given kind of what I've seen at local, state, and as well as around the country, if you are trying to get some accommodations or have your voice heard by the school, go to the school board meetings. And I'll say that part of the reason that I am running for school board was because of the fact that there was not a voice for kids with disabilities during the time of COVID decision making on the board. In fact, they were not even considered. And so as parents, make sure that you're going to school board meetings to have your voice and be the voice for other kids with disabilities, because honestly, all the school board members, if they don't have experience with it, they have no understanding of it. And then also get a doctor's note to be in a situation where you have medical documentation that you're providing to them of what the child's needs are. And we have a question. And the question is if your school is only offering in-person and independent study, and you choose in-person, but at some point your child cannot extend for extended time, if you ask for virtual learning in the interim and the school district says your child should switch to independent study, what should you say and do? That's exactly what I was talking about with the planning for the unexpected. You should be asking for a 504 plan meeting right now to have in there exactly what will occur during those closures. You don't want to wait till the emergency happens to have a discussion on what that placement is going to be. And so you need to prep them now that they're going to need virtual learning. Have a discussion about how that virtual learning is going to occur. Make sure the teachers have all the equipment needed to make that virtual learning occur, that you have all the equipment that will occur. Because listen, we'd all love to say that I can tell you 2 weeks from now exactly what's going to be happening, but I think we all sat here. I mean, I was in Disney World less than 2 weeks before our state closed down, not ever thinking that, 2 weeks from me being in Disney World that we were going to be facing closures. So unfortunately, you can't wait till things go south to plan. We now have enough notice to say, hey, this could be a situation where we might be impacting this year. Let's create a plan. Let's hope we never have to use it, but make sure you have all the dots, I's crossed or T's crossed and I's dotted before you walk into it, so that you have that fight for the virtual learning now when you don't need it. Because the problem is going to be is if you're in a situation where you wait to the difficulties arising, and I think it actually leads in well to the next slide. You're now having to go through can we go to one slide ahead of that? Because I think that's and then we'll go back to the tips for there. So what to do if your requests are denied. You now have access to be able to utilize these things now instead of waiting, because now you're in a situation that if you need the virtual learning starting October 1st, you just figure it out September 30th, and now you're walking through this process. It could be November. So there's informal negotiation. And by that, I say you always go up the food chain. Talk to your teacher, talk to the case manager, talk to the supervisor of special education, and honestly, move it up to the superintendent if need be. You need to figure out who is in charge of special education within it, whether it's the supervisor, the superintendent, and be having discussions with them, but don't let it go. There is a lot of alternative dispute resolutions in many states. There's mediation in all 50 states. It occurs differently in every state. Sometimes it is done by parent of a child, another parent of a child with a disability. Sometimes it's by trained mediators. Sometimes it's by hearing officers themselves. Sometimes it's by administrative law judges. So make sure, and that's something where you would go, there would be an independent person come in and help try to mediate the dispute. You have a right to an impartial hearing, and that is you have to put the request in writing, seek a hearing officer. Those are legally binding situations. So my advice is you, at least prior to doing it, speak with an attorney about what your rights are before going into that impartial hearing, because the stats on it are just overwhelming throughout all 50 states. Parents are much more successful with having an attorney if you're having a hearing than they are without it. You could also do, and this is actually a very effective measure too, is the Office of Civil Rights complaint. You can go right to their website, fill out a complaint about it, and they will do an investigation. And then obviously, if all these are unsuccessful, you fail at the hearing, all your attempts to negotiate, it's been a situation where you can actually file a lawsuit in federal or state court. And there was someone who just said that what if you filed and spent penny for over a year? So at that point in time, and I mean, I know that they're really behind right now, and there's been a lot of issues with a big uptick because of COVID and kids. My advice is then to go through one of the other routes. Start the alternative dispute resolution. Impartial hearings have timeframes under both 504 and IDEA. So if you're at that point in time and it's still continuing to impact, you need to switch gears and do one of the other methods, because the fact is I don't know when they used to be much better than that. It was not over a year, and they would do an investigation, it would move along. They were proactive. It has definitely slowed down this past year or so.
I just wanted to let you know we are at about 5 minutes
until
the session time.
Great. Why don't we go back one slide then, and I'll just touch base on kids with college. So here's obviously there's not the same level of rights that exist for kids who are in college as it does for kids in the birth through 21 years of age. But Section 504, which we talked about, still applies in college. Now, it's not quite the same as it is for the secondary schools, but it does require a lot for post-secondary. So my advice for kids, if your kid is older and your child is still going to need supports or accommodations going into college, do research on which colleges are very supportive of kids and have strong disability service, groups. There's actually usually a building on campus dedicated or an office on campus. When you're visiting campuses with your kids, visit the office, meet with them to see what's going on about that situation. So my advice would be to go ahead and visit the campuses, bring your 504 plan. Now, for kids who are IEP kids, they don't have a separate 504 document. What you definitely want to do is be in a situation where you have a 504 plan written as your child's exiting that you can bring with you to college, because it's makes the transition a lot easier. You're writing it with people who actually know your child, and you can bring that 504 plan. So one of the things in the IDEA talks about transition time period. One of the things I would ask, you should ask for in the transition time period, is that a 504 plan be written. Okay, so we had a question. Can you talk about how the evaluation for a 504 plan and IEP is conducted? Okay, is this something the school organizes? First, for an evaluation to take place, it comes out of two ways. One, either the district says, listen, we think there's some things going on, we want to evaluate, and they will send you notice. Or two, you have to request it in writing. So you send a letter in writing to the school district requesting an evaluation of your child. You should ask for it to be your child to be evaluated under 504 and IDEA. Why that's critical is there have been times I have had kids found who were only evaluated under the IDEA and said, oh, they don't meet the secondary category, they don't need specially designed instruction, they're good to go, but they actually qualified under 504. So you definitely want to be asking for that in writing and make sure they know for it is both for a 504 plan and IDEA eligibility. Generally, they have to occur within a set time frame. That varies by state. But with 504s, you have to evaluate generally every 3 years with the IDEA. There are certain states that have different rules and different requirements about that, but generally it's every 3 years. There is no set time period in 504. So you can have a situation where once your child undergoes a 504 evaluation, they may actually never get evaluated again. So you definitely want to, if you are at all concerned about how your child's doing in school, or you are at all concerned about how COVID has impacted your child, you should be asking for an updated evaluation now. And why that's important is you want to get a picture of where you get the old evaluation, take it with the new evaluation, compare the numbers, see if your child's moving upwards, your child's moving backwards. I have sat at hearing tables with very highly educated, highly involved parents who, when I'm looking at the data for year after year and kind of demonstrating that the child was not making progress, I'll never forget one parent who, again, pediatric nurse at every meeting, highly educated. She looked at me, she goes, and she blurted out in the hearing, she goes, wait, what? Like she couldn't even astound it, because what happens oftentimes is you get into the meetings with the districts and they're talking to you about this picture of your child now. And unless it's like, for example, if you only went to a doctor and your doctor said, listen, I don't know about your history. I don't want to know about your family history. I'm just going to look at you right now and make all my judgments. You'd be like, I don't think I like this doctor. I need a doctor who's going to evaluate my family history, see if I'm making progress. Like, is my health getting better? What were my cholesterol numbers before? Why do you not care about if they're going up or down? So again, you want to be in a situation where you, as the parent, are looking at that data historically over time. And honestly, listen to your parent gut. If you at all have concerns, absolutely ask for an evaluation.
Heidi, I did make a mistake on the time. So we end at 2. So
okay.
We've got about 9 minutes.
I have about 9 minutes. Are there any other questions that I have? Otherwise, I can just, if anyone has a specific topic that they wanted me to go into more depth with, whether it be 504 plans or IDEA plans, or even the evaluation process, I'm happy to do that. And I'll wait for a message to pop up, but I think what's important about it, and I think I'd like to talk about the evaluations unless someone has something a little different to talk about. Valuations are one of the most critical things that occur, because, we talk about the plans that occur after, but it's all based in these evaluations. And if you don't have a good evaluation, you're not going to have a good plan. So what are the hallmarks of a good evaluation? One, that they actually do testing. And by that, I mean, they actually have your child do whatever testing they're evaluating. If they're recommending your child receive physical therapy, there's actually a PT evaluation. If they're saying your child has learning needs, that they are actually evaluating cognitive abilities as well as achievement abilities. If your child has any type of speech needs, that they're actually evaluating the speech needs. If your child has a situation where there is assistive technology that they want to evaluate, that they're actually evaluating that. If your child has any type of social emotional issues, that they're doing rating forms, that they're doing observations, in some cases a functional behavior assessment. So those evaluations are highly critical to the basis for the evaluation. When you get the evaluation, I'll tell you, I did not come to this area of the law knowing evaluations. As a lawyer, I was going to come in and I knew the law obviously, but I didn't know evaluation. To be an effective advocate for my clients and for you to be an effective advocate for your kid, the best thing you can do is when you get the evaluation report, Google, and that's how I taught myself. If you can Google, you can do it. Google the test and figure out what they're actually testing for so that you have it. Because I will tell you that in this field, it is a very acronym driven situation, and it can really bounce you out of unless you speak the lingo. And they will talk over you, they did to me, and they have things, phrases they say. So the more knowledge you have, the more you can push back. That is something that's incredibly important. Okay, so we got a question in. A child has arthritis in her knees, and we want to be set up a 504 for physical accommodations as she heads into middle school. She does well in school. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is ask for an evaluation. I would ask for a PT evaluation to be conducted as part of the 504. I would bring in any doctor's notes that you have, or any type. I would also get a letter from the doctor indicating any accommodations that they see. I would also do a parental input of what you see in middle school, what they're going to need. In middle school, depending on the size of your school, there may be, I know my kids' middle school, there's lots of stairs. So you might need access for an elevator, depending on the situation. They might need a locker secured near the front of the door so that they don't have to carry the books. There could be a situation that someone else may need to carry their books for them, a partner for that. So you want to think about your child as they go through the school day in the physical environment that they're going to be in, and how do you create it so it's least impactful on anything that's going to cause a flare up for the arthritis. I don't know to what extent your child would have any needs in terms of the fact that there may be periods of time that she's literally confined to like a wheelchair or something along those lines, but then you definitely want to have plans in place for that. Make sure that all the classrooms, are accessible to that the classrooms would be set up that she could easily exit and enter it. For example, maybe it's a desk near the door. So again, create all those situations, literally envision yourself with your child going through your child's school day of what's going to be concerning or difficult or could make her life easier. I would love to tell you that districts come to the table with a playbook and they go, here is your menu. What would you like for options? I can tell you that it is absolutely not going to happen. And it's a situation where, so you have to bring as much to the table. I am asking for things, and sometimes the districts are like, oh, well, we never done that before. Well, we can do that because again, it's just a lack of creative solution making. The person who asked the question actually followed up with, the arthritis is invisible and she's in med remission now. That's great. However, what I would do is have a situation where you have a plan for if it wasn't, and that way, and that basically, you will notify if it starts to go, that plan will kick into place. Because if she doesn't need it right now, then great. But again, you will always say hope for the best and plan for the worst. And especially with this kind of situation where you can have flare-ups, it can go south poorly or quickly. Having those backup plans in place is very important. Any other questions or comments or concerns? Anything about college kids, elementary school kids, the CDC? So I guess what I like to do then, if there's no more questions, is kind of do a a wrap up of kind of where we're at, so that we kind of over things just briefly. If your child has a disability and they are not going to fall into needing specially designed instruction, they are entitled to a 504. You should be asking for 504 evaluations, even if right now things are fine, because again, I have had too many situations where you would assume the school districts move quickly or the system moves quickly. And I can tell you education moves slowly prior to COVID. And with the overlay of COVID, it is even slower now. So even though you are in a crisis situation and your kid needs help, the response time is not in any capacity what you think it is. So again, even if everything is fine now, get the plans in place. So if they aren't fine, you already have it in place. We have one of the Teacher's Guide to Arthritis we wrote prior to 504 and share them. Yes, I think that's an excellent solution. This person had indicated that there's actually they have a Teacher's Guide to Arthritis that they had wrote into the plan so that they can share that with all the teachers. I always suggest too doing a single fact sheet for all your teachers. So all your kids' teachers, because especially if you have a dense IEP or something like that, where it's really kind of a very clear indication to them that you as a parent are saying to them, here's how this juvenile arthritis impacts my kid. Like, this is how you're going to see it, or this is why it's invisible and you may not know it, or it might seem it's like this. It's because, again, you guys, when we all do as parents with disabilities, we live our kids' disabilities every day, but not everyone else does. And unfortunately, hidden disabilities oftentimes are seen as, well, they could, why she could walk up the stairs yesterday, well, maybe not today. And so again, that understanding that they can seem fine one day and not be fine the next is important. Can keeping a child home due to medical treatment and immune suppression be included in the evaluation process? Yes, absolutely. You can actually have your child evaluated within a home environment or within an environment. Like we had this past year, because parents were concerned about bringing kids into district buildings because they would be around so many kids. We actually had kids evaluated at a separate school building, like an administration office, so that it was limited how many people would be around the kid and or in the home. So you can absolutely have that as part of the evaluation process. And it's part of the placement process. So if your child is undergoing medical treatment and immune suppression, it needs to be part of that process. That should also be included in the 504 IEP of how that child's going to be accessing education during that time period. And then I think we're at the last minute break. I always also, and then also the Arthritis Foundation has a checklist to print off and go over before the IEP and 504. That was actually provided by one of the people listening. That is excellent. Again, reach out to your resources, Arthritis Foundation, 504 IEP means. Also, if there's any questions, I always offer someone, if they want to email me, they can email me after, a quick question about something or something that they didn't want to talk about maybe during a broad group section. Again, I might not practice in your state. I can just give you general guidance and feedback. And if there is, someone that you want to talk to within your state, I can try to guide you to if anybody I know. But start early. That's for the evaluation. Plan for the worst case scenario, and let's all pray to God, hope for the best, that we will not be sitting here next year talking about COVID and CDC and how to plan for the upcoming school year, right? But thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for being with us today at the JA Virtual Conference. It means so much to us. Thank you to our attendees for joining us for our breakout session today. Please take a moment to provide feedback on your session by completing the conference survey in the app. This will help us guide programming in the future. And be sure to come back for the next round of live breakouts at 2:15 and our general session that will start promptly at 3:10 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find the Zoom link for the general session in the conference app. And be sure to check the conference app for the Arthritis Foundation resources. And I encourage you to take part in the JA Insights today. The access to that is in the app as well. Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.